Hello everyone, my name is Tarin Camarena and I'm a VFX artist and cinematographer, and I spent thousands of hours doing research trying to learn my craft and came up with a bunch of tips actually that I think could help people that I feel that a lot of people don't know about. Now this is my first time on camera. Usually I'm behind the camera so I don't get to be in front of the camera, but this is the first time, and pretty excited, and so is my Fuzzy. Right, Fuzzy? He's a little camera shy. It's both our first time, but here we go. Well, what I'm going to talk about today that I see a lot of issues when I get footage from people shooting, especially on like digital cinema cameras, like the Red or Black Magic, which are capable of shooting in RAW, is they often get the exposure wrong. And I was wondering, why is this? Right, Fuzzy? Why do you think this is? Well, this is what I think is the issue. When it comes to shooting in daylight, they often think the image is a lot darker than what it really is. Because on the screen, the sun is just so powerful that it makes the screen look really dark, and they end up overexposing it. That's the first reason. The second reason is that they don't expose at the native ISO, which the native ISO for both my Red camera right here and Blackmagic camera is ISO 800. And the issue is that what they do is they expose because you have all this dynamic range in these cameras, and instead of using up all the range, they expose either too far to the right or too far to the left instead of having a nice even spread. If you expose at ISO 800, you get a nice even spread of values from dark to light. So this is very important when shooting outside because the sun is just super powerful and can easily wash out your colors. So shoot at the native ISO 800. Don't lower it down to 200 to get your right exposure. Instead, use your aperture as your #1 priority. And if you have to, depending on what sort of shot you're trying to get in terms of depth of field, use your ND filter. What you want is the light as clean as possible coming into the sensor. So one tip for shooting outside that I use is to stop it down once your exposure at ISO 800. Pay attention to your histogram and expose it down just right before hitting the noise threshold. On the Red camera, it'll literally tell you on the left-hand side, there's a bar, and it'll fill up with red. Just right before you're about to hit it, and leave it right there, right before you hit the noise threshold. Even if you hit the noise threshold and get a little bit of noise, it's not a big deal. It's an easy fix, but if you wash out your colors, there's nothing you can do. It's gone. All that information is gone, and you don't have as much room to work with in post. So that's a great little tip if you have a hard time getting the exposure. Just lower it down just right before it reaches the noise threshold. If in doubt, darker is always better. You got to be careful with using ND filters because you want the light to be as clean as possible that is coming to the sensor. And the reason for this is that you want very rich colors. And a lot of times with the ND filters, if you overdo it, it makes the color, since they all, at least the ones that I've tried, they all have a little bit of a color cast, even if they claim to be neutral and have pretty decent ND filters, circular ND filters and variable ND filters. And then it'll just overpower it, the color. As well as, especially with the variable ND filter, since it's basically two circular polarizers together, is that it will crush your shadows. And when you try to recover them in post, even with a RAW camera, there's just literally no information there. It doesn't just get grainy, but there's literally no detail. It's all gone. So you got to be very careful. So it's always best to stop down with your aperture first as priority and then use your ND filter. And also, the two ND filters I have one of them it has a slightly cool cast, another one has a slightly warm cast. And when I'm shooting a subject like a person to get the skin looking nice, good skin tones, when shooting during the sunset, I would use the cooler cast one to offset the harsh, like very rich, warm colors. And you get really beautiful skin tones. And while shooting during midday, you mainly get the global ambient blue skylight color. And I use my warm variable ND filter to offset that color. Now with the variable ND filter, you got to be careful because even though you can crank it all the way to 10 stops, it's really only usable to 5, maybe pushing at 6 stops before it just gets overwhelmed with the orange tint cast, and the shadows just become really, really opaque. So be careful with that. And it's always best because it's just shooting outside. It's just very, very high contrast. Use a reflector. Like, you want to help the sensor as much as possible. Give light on the person's face, mainly exposed for the light areas so you don't lose the color, because once that's gone, it's gone. So help out the sensor, and that's very important, especially if you're shooting on a camera like a DSLR, which has limited dynamic range. Another good one too is like with this red camera, you can shoot HDR, which sometimes is very necessary when shooting outside with the high contrast, or it can help a lot. It's if you, by chance, you don't have a reflector, or even in addition to reflector. It's a very good option. It does, of course, take up more disk space and messes up with your motion blur a little bit, but it gives you a much better image, and I think that's much more important overall. The other issue is when exposing indoors, that I see a lot of people get it wrong. When exposing indoors, don't just crank up the ISO because your camera can go like a billion ISO. If it's kind of dark in the room, it's not going to look pleasant. You need light to have rich colors. Otherwise, it's just going to look like nighttime security footage. And a lot of the cameras these days can go up to really crazy high ISOs. But if you want a cinematic image, you need to feed it light. One trick that I use when shooting with these digital cinema cameras is exposing it at a lower ISO, because it's very difficult, and most likely you're not going to overpower the sensor with artificial light. It's just never as powerful as the sun, so I wouldn't worry about it so much. More light is better. So expose it at the lower ISO, and it'll force you to feed it more light, or kind of trick your brain into feeding it more light. And also, one thing that I see people doing, I don't really understand why, is I guess it's just a lazy way, is they stop down with an ND filter, which is the last thing you want to do, especially shooting indoors. The light is not as clean as the light that you get from the sunlight. Shooting indoors with the artificial light, you do not want anything that prevents you from getting nice, clean light to get rich colors shooting indoors. So do not stop down with an ND filter. Use aperture or control your lighting. And those are my tips for today. I have a bunch more I've came up with. There's just so many that I'll release in later videos very soon, since I will be posting these frequently when I have time in between my projects, etc. And hopefully Fuzzy won't be as camera shy next time. You know, it is his first time, so he's getting used to it. Oh, there you go, see? He's excited now. He's ready. So, till next time, feel free to comment, like, ask questions. I'll be more than happy to answer. So, till next time, bye. Fuzzy power.